I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. Okay, so today we're over to Austin again. I think I'm beginning to think I should take up residence there. So my guest today is a multi-instrumental musician, so drums, all conceivable types of drums, xylophone, vibraphone, marimba, clarinet, orchestral bells. He's also a massively creative carpenter and artist, and many more things. But for me, he's 100% a community builder, and for the many, not for the few. Not just in his East Austin neighborhood, but also worldwide. And really sort of check out his Twitter. It's an absolute riot. He's played and collaborated with Swans, Bill Callahan, Shahzad Ismaily, Anna Rossi, Jarboe, Amanda Palmer, Ben Frost, and many others. And his current collective with Peggy Ghorbani and Sarah Gautier is for me is really a kind of masterclass in improvisation, experimentation, and community sharing. So it's really an honor to welcome Thor Harris to the podcast. And welcome, Thor.
Thank you, Giles. Hello, y'all.
Hello. So I say so like musically. So I think you're my third guest from Austin.
Oh, who else did you have?
So I've spoken to, so already released is Taz Muerte from Blaxploitation.
Uh-huh.
And I recently interviewed or had a chat with Audrey Campbell from Pleasure Venom.
Oh, right on.
Who are, and but, you know, both those bands are absolutely, you know, amazing. I've known them for a few years. In fact, I met them both Taz, Lars, their manager, and the Pleasure Venom guys when they came over to the UK, which I think was September 2019. So probably about 3 4 months before sort of COVID hit.
Yeah.
And they were, you know, playing a few dates around the UK. There was a festival in London called Loud Women Fest, and Pleasure Venom were playing there. So yeah, it was great to kind of catch up with them. And there seems to be seems to me there's a kind of this great, you know, kind of music creativity going on in Austin.
There is, yeah. It's Austin it's like churning out more music, I think, than ever. And it's sort of in a race against like it becoming impossible to live here because it's too expensive for artists. But you know, so far, a lot of us are still hanging on. As Giles and I were talking, podcast listeners, before the intro, we talked a little bit about the cost of living. You know, for an artist, you sort of take a vow of poverty at a very young age. And that is fine in most cases, but if you have to go to a doctor, or if the rent in your town, you know, increases by like 500%, then it becomes more challenging. So, but you know, so far, this is still a town full of creative people. Yeah. And as Giles mentioned, I also am a carpenter and a plumber, and with there being more money in this town, like more people that can afford to have me make them a big wooden door or whatever. I you know, in some ways, like as a craftsman, it's a little bit easier to make a living. You know, you get older and sort of better at that anyway. But I've always even during the band Shearwater, which I was in for 12 years, you know, we would come home with very little money, but I could, you know, immediately go back to work on people's houses, and like I would line up jobs so that when I was off tour, I'd be doing that kind of work. And the other people in that band had like master's degrees in playwriting and stuff. Yeah. But it was, you know, it was much harder for them to go on and off of tour. One of them was Howard Draper, this tremendous musician. He lives in Portland. He's like, he does cyber security stuff.
Right.
And
Okay.
and he could do some of that while he was on tour, but yeah, it's it's just that balance that all artists do.
And that kind of interest in kind of doing things with your hands, the kind of the carpentry and sort of working with wood, was that something that you had from an early age?
Yeah, it started very young. My dad, as well as Giles's dad, my dad was a mechanical engineer, and there were just like, there was a machine shop next to the dining room, like feet from our kitchen table, and through a door was a metal lathe for making metal parts.
Oh, my dad had one of those in the garage.
And it made these little curly shavings that as a child, they're real sharp, and you'd play with them as handfuls of them as a child. So that was like I don't know, 2 meters from our dining room table, and he was a little bit messy like me, so there was always like, friends would bring him things to fix, and they would sort of stack up in his shop, and there was, my house too is like a stack of unfinished sort of broken things that I'm supposed to fix. He was a lot better at it than me. We were different sort of ratios. I'm more of a artist, but he was also an artist. He was a good oil painter and sculptor. Okay. As far as I know, he didn't ever play music, but he did buy us a piano when I was real young. And
you so you had the piano, you also had the drums when you were young as well.
Yeah.
As your kind of like creative, as well as one of the kind of creative outlets.
Yeah. As soon as the piano arrived, I did spend a lot of time with it, and I even had a piano teacher, but I wouldn't say that I like really got obsessed with music until I was about 9, and that's when I started playing drums and taking drum lessons. Then I just forgot about piano for some years, until I think college. I started studying piano again.
Yeah. I mean, I like my kind of relationship with music. My dad was he loved his music. He was sort of classically trained, so he kind of sung in a choir. He also played the piano a bit as well, and he really wanted me to get into music, and that's how I got into I played the cello when I was a kid.
Wow.
I think I was probably 8. Sort of.
Do you still play some?
I stopped when I was 16. I basically kind of did all my grades, and I as a kind of like that sort of mid-teen, well, increasingly through my teens, the music that I listened to was punk rock, and I just at that time I could not reconcile my love of that music with playing classical music. I just could not do it. So I kind of like I went along with it, and eventually I gave up the cello. I didn't pick it up for over 30 years. And I went into a shop in London just out of curiosity, and said in Soho in London, and just went in and said, look, I explained the situation. I said, would you mind if I just went into one of your rooms and just picked up a cello and had a play? And he's like, sure, go ahead. Went in and played it. And it brought back all these memories.
Wow.
When I was a kid.
Yeah, our brains are such weird things.
Weird. Yeah.
Like the way they store memories like that, and that whatever that is that they call muscle memory. I mean, of course, perhaps it's in our nerve fibers to some degree. They're now considering our entire nervous system to be part of our brain. Which makes sense. But yeah, it's just amazing the stuff that comes. It's like I'm a pretty slow learner. Like if I have to learn all of the parts in your song or something, but once I get it down to that part that you're talking about, where it just comes back to you as you're playing a piece. I don't know, I couldn't describe the whole piece at the beginning, but as I'm playing it, I would know what to do next.
Yeah. And like for the like, when you were a kid, the drums, was it were you self-taught? Do you kind of teach
No,
yourself?
I had teachers.
Teachers, yeah.
I had, I think, like probably 5 or 6 different teachers before I even left high school. So I
Yeah.
started when I was 9, I think, with a guy named Joe Hallbrook. And I just, would walk to the little music store, which was, I think it was probably a, 10-minute walk from my house, maybe
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
And then we would just sit in a practice room and he would, show me the basics and some of the rudiments. I don't know in England if it's the same, but we had a little sheet that was 26 essential rudiments.
Rudiments of music, yeah.
Yeah. And we would, so I would practice those and, learn to read rhythm, but not read melody. I didn't really learn that until college, and I'm still very slow at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I can read rhythm pretty well. So yeah, I had drum instructors, and I'm really glad, because the we had these sort of stilted old band directors that would make us play boring old classical music. And like you just said, Giles, I could not go, okay, this is music, and then also Kiss is music. But are they the same thing? By getting good at this, can I be a rock star later? Like, do I really need to learn all this boring stuff? But, I'm glad that some of it sunk in spite of my hatred for several of my band directors and their hatred for me. They could tell I was talented, but just I couldn't pay attention. I just lacked the discipline because I thought their music choice was boring. And I think that's still a problem. Like in universities, there's a university right next to me called the University of Texas, and I hear from a friend of mine that plays in Thor and Friends that those guys that run that department, the music department at UT, think that the American minimalists, these are people like John Cage, Terry Riley, that those guys, that's not real music, that they don't really think that was an important movement. I think that's the best thing. Like, I love classical music up until about Mozart. Then all of that stuff is boring to me.
Yeah.
And then the 20th century stuff starts to get interesting again, because then everybody, all the different colors of people have to live in the same cities, and they're inspiring each other and stealing each other's ideas. Without cultural appropriation, music wouldn't exist. Music as we know it. All of you white people, you would be playing Wagner, and thank God we don't have to do that. Thank God this horrible nation based on genocide and slavery happened and crammed all of these cultures together so that we could stop playing Wagner.
Yeah, exactly. So you did. So talking of that, of different sort of influences, you recently put out some songs, kind of strongly influenced by dub.
Yeah, I love dub.
And doom, or doom and dub, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, doom dub.
Yeah. So was that like an influence from quite an early age?
It was an influence from a pretty early age. When I was probably 14 or something, I got into, that's when reggae started to, let's see, what year would that have been? That would have been like late 70s.
Yeah.
Reggae was starting to get really available all over the States. And that band, The Police, I loved that band a lot. And they talked about being influenced by music from Jamaica. And then recently, so what I didn't realize was a lot of the rock music, like Bauhaus, that song Bela Lugosi's Dead,
Yeah.
is like those guys, that song sort of happened because those guys were practicing in a big rehearsal space somewhere in London where all these dub bands were practicing, and they wanted to play like that, you know, but they were these weirdo psycho English white guys, and that's what you get when those kind of guys fail at dub. You get Bela Lugosi's Dead, which is great. You know, so much of it. But yes, dub. I got to meet Lee Scratch Perry one time at a festival in Greece.
Oh wow!
And he's not very tall, but what a magical dude.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny if you mention in a circle of musicians, if you mention the American minimalists of the 20th century, or if you mention dub, almost all musicians and certainly all drummers love both of those movements. And those two movements are just huge to me. Me and, you know, I'm friends with Jeff Barrow. He has a band called Beak now. And I played a little bit with them live when they came over to Austin, I think to the last real South by Southwest. And I know he's like a super dub fan. You know that guy Kevin who has a band called The Bug? Kevin, I can't remember his last name.
Don't know.
He makes ambient music, but he also makes.
I'll have a look while you're talking.
The Bug is a dub band and they're from England, but I think now he lives in Belgium.
Kevin Martin.
Yeah, Kevin Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, we've met once in real life, but he's become a very dear online friend. I guess all of our friendships are online now, except for
that's true. Yeah, with the magazine that I was mentioning earlier that we're doing with youth, we have a feature with Adrian Sherwood. You know, kind of talking about his life, you know, and how he kind of got into dub. You know, in a where was it, somewhere in South London, I think it was when he was a kid. But like, you know, kind of, you know, that whole kind of on you. I remember hearing the whole sort of on you sound style, and Gary Clayle and Tackhead and all those sort of people in the kind of like the mid 80s when I was in my mum and dad's sort of spare room, sort of listening to a Sunday afternoon provincial radio show. And hearing these like totally like off the wall kind of sounds that were sort of coming out. I mean, really incredible.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad you mentioned Tackhead. I think the way I think where a lot of my fascination with those kind of beats started was second wave ska too, like the Specials, the Selector. Bands like that I just loved that. I mean, it took, you know, I do like some rock music, like heavy rock music, but not that much. Mostly what I grew up on, in America, we called it crossover radio, which meant that it could be played on an AM station and an FM station. Those are just two different ways of broadcasting. Do y'all have AM and FM in England?
We do. I mean, we still do, but I mean, it's mostly kind of FM, and everybody's, you know, kind of goes towards that now. Yeah,
back in the 70s, if a song could be played on AM and FM, it was called crossover.
Crossover, yeah.
And soul music and funk music was all doing the crossover at that time. So if you got in a 1971 Chevy Impala, you know, that just had an AM radio, you might hear, you know, stuff that was recorded in Motown. And you would also hear that stuff on the FM station. And so that I think the first records I owned were Jackson 5.
So for you like sort of getting into the you know, the, let's call it the music biz, but you know, sort of in terms of sort of forming bands and things like that. I mean, were you kind of like encouraged to do that? And did you ever, you know, when you were doing that, was that something that you were kind of, okay, I'm just going to do this? Or did you have a little bit of reticence about going into that? Or was it just like full on, this is what I want to do?
I think it was pretty full on, this is what I want to do. Like once I was like 11 or 12, I was just driven to play drums in rock bands. And we formed bands when we were in junior high and did covers, you know. I was a huge Rush fan, of course. If you were a drummer, you were. And I still, that music, I love that music. And I love that it got so famous while being just panned by critics.
There's something in that, isn't it? It's kind of like, it's sort of quite cathartic when you think, okay, well, you see a review and you think, okay, this is good.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'll take that.
Yeah. But yeah, I started forming bands when I was like in junior high, and then because my family, they're all real smart, educated people, I was expected to go to college, and I was a terrible student. I was the dumb one of my 3 siblings, and so you know, I stuck with college as long as I could, but then once I got to Austin, because I kept my grades up enough to get into UT, University of Texas, because I really wanted to move to Austin because I knew there was a sort of music scene here. And then once I started meeting all the weirdos in town and forming bands with them, there was just no stopping me at that point.
Was that a kind of group of people that you just sort of gravitated towards? You just kind of naturally, okay, I want to be amongst, I'm kind of finding my people.
Yeah, it was like when I was at the time still trying to go to UT. I was studying music, pretty bored with school and paying for it myself. But yeah, when I worked at this sandwich shop, and it was just a place frequented by hippies and weirdos in the mid 80s. And yeah, when you meet a kindred spirit, you can sort of tell that they're into the stuff you're into. And I was just always getting in conversations about music, and then would end up playing with.
How did you find that? You know, sort of being amongst those sort of like-minded people. What did that give give your mindset? You know, how did you feel that you kind of like started to evolve as a person, being amongst that like-minded group of people?
Well, what that did, because when a kid grows up, probably in England too, before the kid finds like-minded people, you sort of look around at the world and think that it's a fairly dull place.
Yeah.
You know, I thought, okay, suburban America, what do you have for me? And it was very little. But then, once my sister put on that first Jackson 5 a little 45 RPM record, I thought, wow, there's really something going on here. These people are making this super cool, exciting thing happen. And then, that was a spark that made me feel like the world wasn't such a dull and heartless place. And then when I got to Austin, I started to meet sort of large groups of people, friends, for whom music was just tremendously important. People who liked Joy Division, people who liked Frank Zappa. That's just a sort of way that and at that time it was real cheap to live in Austin. So you would, you would run into really smart people who didn't really care anything about monetizing their massive brain power.
Yeah.
They just wanted to do what they were super interested in. And there's that film Slacker is really a study on those kind of people, just interesting, smart weirdos, just wasting their lives, studying God knows what. Yeah. Well, that was really, and to some degree still really is Austin, Now you can make a fortune here, but back then you really couldn't. Even the music industry was still in New York and Los Angeles and a little bit in Chicago. Yeah. Chicago has always had a powerful hand in what great music comes out of America. Since the jazz players moved from New Orleans to Chicago, the scene has been, it's been alive ever since.
Yeah. You've like I mentioned in the at the very start. I mean, for me, you've been absolutely 100% like a kind of community builder. You're obviously a big presence in your local community. That where did that? Because if I look back at myself, like my kind of desire for kind of like sort of social equality, for me, came that came from particularly from my dad, who was more kind of vocal about things than say my mum, who was more kind of, she was like, if she was voting, then I'd be like, who are you voting for, mum? And she would never tell me. It was like this, she used to like keep things to herself, but my dad was like very open, and that's where I kind of got my stuff from. Were there sort of formative influences for you that kind of fed through, as you kind of grew?
Man, I'm really not sure. I know that I don't know where I got that. I just always had that desire to sort of find the interesting, sensitive people. Yeah. One of my friends, Colin Riley, he's been my friend since I was 3. Yeah. And I could probably barely talk at that point, but I knew that this guy was special. It was fun to play with him. We liked a lot of the same things. We both were sort of imaginative, little sissy boys that, we didn't want to go, do sport things. We wanted to play like more imaginary games and things. Yeah. And he's super into music. We're still friends. And that was in 1968 when we met. And I'm still friends with a good number of people that I met as a child. So I always wanted, I don't know. My brother and sister are not nearly so much that way of like, constantly making new friends. And I try, I think people as they get older tend to be less open.
I agree.
To making new friends, but I am not. And the fact that like I didn't start touring the world playing music till I was about 30. So then when I did, I started to make friends kind of all over the world. And then I joined Angels of Light and Swans and so started to be a little bit part of the New York music scene and befriended the kind, interesting people up there. I've always, I guess I'm just terrified of being alone. But, I think like before the internet, the superpower of it is that before there was an internet, I could tell you where the guy was that reconed bass speakers in town. And this guy does it. And he's really good at, you could look in the phone book, but phone books were pretty lame resources.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know where to find, the person who's super into this thing, and then I wanted to keep her number or his number, you know, and keep in touch, because that's the guy that can do this thing.
Yeah.
And you know that is what's really special about humans as a species, is that we are so communal, and each of us becomes so sort of specialized. Like
we are sort of very, at heart, sort of very social. I mean, I think you know, when you kind of look back to, you know, when you were a baby, when you sort of first appear, you know, you want to be, you're inquisitive, you want to be around things, you want to be around people, and you make friends.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do. And then some way it sort of gets lost. It's sort of, I don't know. I mean, I almost like, you know, sort of through school, when you get to school, that those, you know, any kind of dreams you have are kind of blown up. You know, it becomes very kind of academic, and you need to do this and you need to do that and tick boxes and things like that, and you kind of lose the, in a way, some of the fluidity that can exist when you're in your very early kind of years.
Yeah. You know, another thing about, since you just mentioned our inquisitive nature when we're very young, is when I was a kid, I read very slowly, but if I was just to sit and talk to a really smart person, I would learn so much from them.
Yeah.
So from an early age, like, I sought out people smarter than me that I could talk to and learn things from them.
Interesting.
I did learn, if I was really interested in something, my mind would focus enough to let me read about it as well. But much of what I learned about the world was from talking to experts in the different fields of the world. Do
you think that's still the same now? Do you still?
I do. Yeah. And you know what I've always wanted to do, because I was in this band Shearwater with a bird scientist, and he just wrote a new book. His name is Jonathan Myberg, and his new book is called A Most Remarkable Creature, I think. It's about the striated caracara. Well, Jonathan is a scientist, you know, he's an ornithologist. We talked a little bit about the music business, but the music business is really boring to me. Like how music is marketed and sold and distributed. I only care to the degree that I have to.
That you have to. Yeah.
I have to care about this. I have to pay attention to this and know who's distributing our records in England. Oh, is it a different person than is distributing them in the EU now? You know, I have to, that's boring to me, but I have to know something about it.
Yeah.
But I was super intrigued by science, and we talked mostly about science. Well, you know, for the 12 years that I was in that band, and not only, I mean, many of our fans were scientists, because they knew that the main songwriter was a scientist, and so, you know, I met tons of scientists while I was in that band, and I really loved that. I found that super interesting. I mean, I think I have just immense amount in common with musicians. So I do have a lot of friends that are musicians, but I also, you know, I have friends that are like, I don't even like horses, but one of my best friends is a horse doctor here. It's just, I wanted to be around people who knew stuff I didn't know. And there's a mix of that, you know. You want to be around people that have stuff in common with you, for sure. But you also, like, when you're forced or happen to get stuck in a say a prison cell or a college dorm room with someone who knows things you don't know, well, that's super interesting too.
I think that is absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I love the idea of, this is where I kind of got, you know, where my thinking is that, you know, sort of experimental mindsets are really, really important for people, now, because the world is kind of so complex, it's not straightforward. You know, the days of, you know, kind of my dad, when you could just, you know, you get a job and you work through and you retire and that was it. It's so different. And also the, you know, the thing that, you know, the idea that sort of scientists and that, you know, having that mindset means you're not tied to outcomes. So you've less chance of disappointing yourself. You're more, you know, kind of open-minded, because it's like, you know, what happens is kind of data. You use data to then try again. If it doesn't kind of work out how you think it would do, you use that and try it again to try and improve.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a really kind of strong sort of, you know, attitude and sort of mindset to, you know, to have. You know, in whether it's in work or in life, and generally, I think, you know, about that. As you know, you continue to surround yourself with people and ask about people that you know, kind of may you know a lot of things. A lot of people don't do that. You know, they kind of like their ego sort of stops them from doing that. Now, I can't ask them or get them involved because it might show me up. It's a kind of ego thing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I guess so. And, you know, the same, if you wanted to narrow the scope even a little bit, the same goes for music. Like, to talk to someone who knows about the kind of music that I don't know much about. Like the old, you know, there's the old sort of stereotypical conversation with the guy who works in the record store and knows all the records.
Yeah.
You know, that was golden to me. Like, if I could go into the record store and say, I like Steve Reich, music for 18 musicians. What do you got? And then this guy turns you on to everything else. That was just like, oh, eureka.
Yeah.
And back then I would sit there with a little notepad before the digital age, and I would write them down and cross them off my list as I could afford to buy them.
But I mean, and also what you were saying earlier about, you know, kind of, you know, you surround yourself with friends, you make new friends, you know, and I mean, and I guess that's, to me, that's sort of shown itself up in the way that you collaborate.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of collaborations.
Yeah, because I'm not a control freak, and I don't really, because I'm the youngest in my family, I wasn't really in charge of anything. But and I just don't have that. When I start making a piece of music, I don't have any on none of those Thor and Friends pieces we have 4 records out now. Did I hear anything near complete? And that's fortunate, because I don't get tied to any musical visions or outcomes. Michael from Swans is a control freak. I love him, and I loved work. I learned so much by working with him. But he, you know, he very much directed the other people, told them what to do. I really enjoy not being in control or having some vision that where I know how the thing is going to come out. And I love the surprises that putting 4 sensitive musicians or 10 musicians in the same room and saying, I don't know, just play along. I don't want to tell you too much. You know, I want you to do what you think that this piece of music needs. When we made that record, Shahzad and Thor with Annie Rossi, what I thought we were going to do was me and Shahzad, I thought we were going to sit, me and Shahzad, in a room full of instruments, and each of us play something for 5 minutes and then roll back, and each of us pick up a different instrument and play, and then overdub for 5. But we didn't. What we ended up doing was putting together these little ensembles of whoever was still awake at, I think we started at 10 at night and then recorded till 2 in the morning every night in Shahzad's studio. But whoever we happened to run into that day that could come and join us, and they were just sort of improv sessions with about 5 mics in a room, and we played really quietly. And I made sure that if someone was just a virtuoso at some instrument, I wanted them to play something else, because I didn't want anything to be sort of by rote kind of kind of playing. That was a fun
that's interesting you say that, because one of my episodes is with a producer and engineer, and he was saying that one thing that he likes to do is to, he's a very collaborative person as well, and wants everybody that's in the kind of recording studio to feel like they have a role to play. And there are obviously sort of different politics and dynamics within bands, but he likes to basically kind of just sort of open the studio up. And he said, but if one thing that he likes to do is to say, is to give the to give it a different element to the creativity, give some of the band members different instruments or different pieces of equipment. Like he mentioned, the drummer who usually sort of sits behind the stool, just sits on the stool behind the kit, kind of give him a sequencer, and then go and try that and go away and then come back and see what different results it produces.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't work in every scenario, but it can be something that people do value, because sometimes you assume that, a bass player has a bass guitar and that's it.
Yeah.
It sounds similar to how you, how your mind sort of approach.
Yeah. I mean, by the time I started Thor and Friends, I had just quit Swans. I was just tired of touring all the time. And my mom was pretty old at that point, and I knew I only had a few years left with her. So I wanted to spend time with her. But at that point, I had been playing drums or those kind of things in bands for 40 years. So I was ready to I didn't know that I was going to do this, but I wanted to start a thing that didn't have bass, drums, and guitar.
Yeah.
Usually Thor and Friends doesn't have any of those.
Yeah.
It just sort of fell together with me, Peg, and Sarah.
I saw you. Must have been the last time you were in the UK when you played in London it was at the Lexington.
Oh, was that 2019? Around?
Could have been 2019, 2018. Yeah, there or thereabouts. And you had kite bass supported. So
yes, kite bass. We've been back to London one more time since then, and we played at what's the corner place called? Is it called the Moth Club?
Oh yeah, in Hackney, the Moth Club. Yeah, I know it.
But yeah, that was a fun show back with kite bass.
Yeah.
That place was upstairs. That was really fun show.
It was upstairs. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you were there.
Yeah, it's a great venue. Yeah, it was a great show. Really good.
I love those kite bass ladies too.
Yeah, they're great. They are really great. So no, interesting though. Yeah. Let's think. So you're the kind of collaborations that you look for, you when you were talking about with Shahzad, that literally sort of finding people as you were going along, is that how you approach them? It's so you don't have a kind of particular person in mind, and you will just say whoever is kind of around, or you think is the right kind of mindset and fit.
Yeah. Once in Asheville, North Carolina, we heard a young violin player playing on the street, and he really was wonderful. And I left a note in his case and said, hey, we're playing down the street at this place called the Orange Peel. If you want to come play with us. And he showed up, and he was so great. Wow. And he that was with Thor and Friends, and we just sort of gave him the key of each song and told him, this is the basic idea, and the music is so repetitive and hypnotic, you'll sort of know what to do. And people really do with that music. Like, it only had a few moments where I was like, whoa, okay, tone that down a little bit. But people seem to know what to do when they hear that music. And that guy we took him with us to his name escapes me right now. he's a wonderful player, and we've kept in touch with him. We took him the next night. We took him to Nashville, and that was where he was from. And we were opening for Explosions in the Sky, and he got to play at Ryman Auditorium, which is a famous venue in Nashville, that I'm sure he always wanted to play at when he was a kid. So that was really fun to get to hang out with this new fantastic musician, real young guy.
It's
but yeah, I find, like, if I just sit around alone in my house and think about humans and people, we're a pretty despicable lot. But then when you get out in the world, like I just met you today, and you actually meet people, a huge majority of them are really kind and interesting, and have, because we each have these like gigantic brains. They each have something different that they're sort of focused on that you might have overlooked, and they're one-on-one, or it's a much better, better than it looks as from above.
From above, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes the kind of funnel that sometimes we're fed, the information that's sort of fed to us, it sometimes it seems like devastation is going to happen tomorrow, and maybe it will do, but it's like, okay, well, but you're right, when you speak to people and you kind of like have that, and I'm a really kind of strong believer in the power of kind of gut instinct, and actually that kind of human connection that occurs, that it's so powerful, that when you can do things like this, as opposed to kind of like sort of typing on the keyboard, and there isn't that, then that's where the potentially the problems kind of lie. I think that, I mean, the other interesting one you mentioned about kind of playing with a sort of younger musician. What's your sort of take on the sort of mindset of sort of across generations? Because we're living a lot longer now, and there are there's probably another generation that is, to add to the, what was it, sort of three before, that are now kind of existing together. How do you see them kind of working together, pretty much separate? How do you see that?
Well, I think that this is the case in all aspects of life, but perhaps it's amplified in music, pun intended. When we are just hanging out with people of our generation, we all know the same sitcoms that we grew up on. In Swans, I was the young guy. I was one of the younger people. I was the second youngest. But in Shearwater, I was like 10 years older than everybody else in that band. And I know some teenagers have played in Thor and Friends, and I'm 56. And I really like what they bring. Sometimes I can't exactly say what it is. But I really like what they bring, and I think that by hanging out with an old guy who has made this sort of strange life for myself, not like the lives on Leave It to Beaver or the Dick Van Dyke Show, or or maybe not like their parents or something. Hopefully I can give them courage to make their life, because to make their lives what they want them to be. Because I remember when I was about, certainly from the time of my late teens through my early 20s, I wasn't sure what my life was going to be, and I was afraid that it was going to become really boring. And I remember when I would meet an older artist or something, some free spirit who had managed to hang on to youthful inspiration well into his, well into his 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and certainly 80s. Like there's a potter. Well, he does a lot of things. He's a painter too. I think he's 75. And Peg and I go and have dinner with him probably 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And it's just so inspiring. He's so prolific.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wish that there were a formula for making cross-generational bands be a thing that happens more, because young people, unlike me, they're way more these days aware of the whole lexicon of 20th century music.
Yeah.
Like they know the stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early aughts.
Yeah.
They don't all, of course, but a lot of them do. A lot of that music is still viewed as really important.
I mean, I think also the sort of the kind of societal influences that different generations have. Like when we were kind of growing up, so certainly in the UK, there was a lot of, well, there was bad political scene in the UK in the 70s. Then the 80s, there was obviously, then globally there was the kind of the Cold War going on. We didn't have the technology, whereas kids sort of born in the sort of the late 80s, they've kind of grown up with technology. They haven't grown up with the Cold War, so the influences are kind of completely different.
Yeah.
And this idea from a music point of view of the technology that's available to kind of basically kind of create music, create all this different sorts of music in your own room. It's kind of like really exciting, as a different way, if you're open-minded enough to be able to, as a kind of older person, to listen to that and see the creativity and ability that goes into that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when that first James Blake record came out, and it was just a beautiful record. And the stunning thing was that he made it in his room on his laptop.
Yeah.
Whereas at his age, I would have been just, doing a lot of woodshedding, playing instruments, but I didn't do multi-track recording until I was 20 something. But the thing is, any laptop is a multi-track recorder now.
Absolutely.
That's super exciting. And the fact the collapse of the music industry is also super exciting. I remember being in my 20s and playing some of the early South by Southwests, and this was before the 90s explosion of independent labels. You just kind of had to, there were some small independent labels, but we were sort of all just like trying to get the attention of these 5 or 6 giant labels so that we could make a record and hopefully tour the country. And then of course, the 80s punk bands they were just like, fuck it, we're gonna put out our record on this little tiny label, and we're gonna get in a van and go on tour.
DIY. Yeah. Wow. So what's next musically for you then?
Well, so I'm recording at home now because I learned Logic, and I got one of these. And it's a for those of you podcast listeners, it's a Focusrite Scarlett. It's just a sort of cheap interface that if you've turned your computer into a multi-track recording studio, it's the little box that goes between your XLR cables where your microphones go in and your USB port on your 10-year-old Mac. So I'm doing a lot of home recording, And in America, because we got rid of the dumbest president we have ever had, we actually have vaccines now.
Yes.
So Thor Friends just played our first show in public like 5 days ago.
Oh wow!
And it felt amazing.
Oh, congratulations!
I call Sarah Goat. Her last name is Gautier. She wasn't there because she lives in upstate New York now, but she's still going to be very much a part of Thor Friends. But we're going to play probably most Austin gigs without her. But but the whole world is not getting vaccinated. We still can't get on planes and come to Europe.
Yeah.
Neither me, Peggy, nor Goat have much interest in touring like the wretched Midwest of the USA, you know. So we do want to play certain parts of the USA for sure. And there are two great towns in the Midwest that we want to play, Detroit and Chicago. But as far as like doing grueling, 6-week US tours, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I'm going to keep doing a lot of overdubs. Me and Jarboe are working on some soundtrack music together right now. And it's
incredible.
It's as we're doing this podcast, I have to say it's like easier than it's ever been to work with people all over the world that you've never even met. And because I did all of that touring with Swans and Shushu and I've met a lot of people, like opening acts and just people that I've learned about that I do want to work with. So I still do this thing that I'm sort of infamous for, of just writing to people and saying, hey, I really think your music's great. If I can ever help you in any way, let me know. And that, sometimes I get nothing back, which is fine. Then I'm just, but a lot of the time they respond and say, yes, we need marimba or alto clarinet on this piece of music, or this terrible hurdy-gurdy that you built. We would like 10 minutes of that. I don't know why anyone would, but several people have.
You're just accommodating all tastes.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Well, so Thor, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely amazing.
Giles, such a pleasure to talk to you.
Really incredible. Thanks so much. Really
Thanks so much for having me.
Not at all. Take care, and listen, congratulations on the first gig as well, and hopefully there'll be more to come anyway.
More to come.
Definitely. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.